Our gospel reading this morning is from the Gospel according to John, chapter 1, verses 43 through 51. The next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee. He found Philip and said to him, "Follow me." Now Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found him about whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus, the son of Joseph from Nazareth." Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Philip said to him, "Come and see." When Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him, he said of him, "Here is truly an Israelite in whom there is no deceit." Nathanael asked him, "Where did you get to know me?" And Jesus answered, "I saw you under the fig tree before Philip called you." Nathanael replied, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." Jesus answered, "Do you believe because I told you that I saw you under the fig tree? You will see greater things than these." And he said to him, "Very truly I tell you, you will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Last week I told you that we would follow the Gospel of Mark throughout the season of Epiphany as we seek to renew the Jesus movement in our time. But today, the lectionary divines slip a passage from John's Gospel into the sequence because John doesn't get a whole year of gospel cycle like Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and so from time to time, we have to let John interject and have his say, give us his way of seeing the Jesus story. And seeing is key for John. Seeing is believing. Seeing is knowing. See what I mean? See what I did there? We use the same kind of language of seeing that John does to say more than just physical seeing. And what John wants us to see is how Jesus sees things. And then Jesus wants to invite us to see things the way he sees them. And that takes some work on our part. We are prone to looking, not seeing. We are prone to glance at things and draw conclusions on the basis of the surface of things. Jesus looks deeper and sees things at their core. His eyes don't deceive him in the way ours do. Look at this encounter, for instance, with Nathanael at the beginning of his ministry when he is calling his disciples. Now, to set this up, you should know that Jesus has just left Judea in the wilderness at the Jordan River where he was baptized by John. Some of John's disciples, two of them, started following Jesus, and it turns out to be Andrew and Simon, and Jesus turns to them and basically says, "What are you doing?" He says, "What are you looking for?" There's that language again, right? And they don't answer him directly. They say, "Where are you staying?" And staying is another one of those words in John that means more than one thing. It's the same word as abide or dwell, and it indicates a person's relationship to the divine. Well, anyway, they ask this, and Jesus answers the question and simply says, "Come and see." And then he looks at Simon, or he looks into him, and he says, "You're going to be called Cephas from now on." That is Peter, the rock, because Jesus has looked deep enough into him to see his potential and his real character, and he names it from that moment on. We pick up the story with Jesus back in Galilee calling Philip, and then Philip goes to call Nathanael. And Nathanael hesitates when he hears where Jesus is from. Nazareth. Nazareth? Now, see, Nazareth is one of those places you might not want to be from. Nazareth is, how shall I say this in the context of this week? Nazareth is not Norway. I'm not making this stuff up. And I'm going to go back to tell you, I didn't pick this passage. It was a sign for the day, right? Sometimes you just have to shake your head at the coincidences of the Spirit. Who knows? I even wonder when I read this, though, whether John cleaned up Nathaniel's language a little bit, when he said, "Can any good thing come out of Nazareth?" Well, like maybe only your Lord and Savior? Philip just says, "Come and see." This wasn't Nathaniel's finest hour. It's a shallow way of looking at the world. Nazareth was probably a very poor village, maybe 200 to 400 people at most. It was day laborers. It was situated a short walk from Sippori, which is also called Sepphoris, and that was a big building project town. And if you've ever been there, you would know, it was a garrison of the Romans and a palace and everything. It's a beautiful place. And they were doing work at that time. And probably Joseph, who lived in Nazareth, that's where he probably worked along with other carpenters and stonemasons mainly. In other words, Nazareth, though, was not that. It was outside of the structures of power in that society. And that's all Nathaniel could think of when he heard Nazareth. And that's all we think of when we stereotype people on where they're from. Now, my mother and I would probably like you to know that from her side of the family, we are from Norway. And proud of it. Really, really. But she would join me in saying that our citizenship is in heaven before it is anywhere on earth. And any Christian who determines anyone's value first on the basis of what country they come from, or what color is their skin, or even what they can offer at any given moment educationally or economically to others, they are seeing like Nathaniel before he learns to see like Jesus. We have to learn to see people like Jesus sees them if we are ever to offer the world anything more than more tribalism and division and prejudice. And if you are in this room today or watching by live stream, and you are from Haiti, El Salvador, Africa, or any of those places that you might wonder about people's estimation of who you are, I want you to hear the word of the Lord today and understand it doesn't come from a pastor or a president. Either one. You are a beloved child of God. And that's where you find your worth. And we are all going to learn that that's the truth about who you are. And we want you to know that you get it from your Creator, no matter who you are or where you've come from. And part of the benefit of being part of a church that sends missionaries around the world and that goes on mission trips around the world, including to places like that, is we actually meet people there. That we actually look at them and learn from them and see what remarkable spirits they have and how God is at work in their lives. And we are changed by them instead of simply assuming we know who they are because we have only looked at the surface of things. Which takes us again to Jesus. When Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him, John says, and that ought to pique our interest right there. He saw him coming toward him. Jesus says about him, "Here is truly an Israelite in whom there is no deceit." Jesus sees him coming and sees right into him, to who he really is. And the reference here, you might have missed it, is to Jacob in the Old Testament. Jacob, whose name means deceiver, and who was all of that before an encounter with God that changed him and changed his name to Israel. What Jesus is saying is, you don't have the deceitful aspect of Israel, you have the transformed, authentic character of Israel. And Nathaniel doesn't understand how Jesus could have gotten to know him this way. And Jesus tells him he had already seen Nathaniel when he was sitting under the fig tree, which is something that is actually lost on all of us. Apparently it wasn't lost on Nathaniel, because immediately upon hearing this, Nathaniel says, he goes from saying, "Can any good thing come out of Nazareth?" to, "Rabbi, Son of God, King of Israel." In other words, Nathaniel's encounter with Jesus' way of seeing him changes the way Nathaniel sees Jesus. Sarah Silverman is a Jewish comedian from New York. She's often foul-mouthed at that, but something has gotten into her lately. She has a TV show on Hulu called I Love You, America. And she travels around to those parts of the country that are very unlike her. And she meets with people who are very different from her socially and politically, and she gets to know them, and they get to know her, and they get to laughing together and looking at each other differently because they learn to see each other at a deeper level than their previous prejudices. Well, recently, a man was trolling her on Twitter, and he used a crude epithet for her, one that begins with the letter C. Instead of blocking him or engaging in a war of words with him, she decided to go deeper and look into him. She went to his Twitter profile and read about him, and then read some of his posts that were more confessional about his back pain and about his depression and about his discouragement about life and all of that. And she decided to respond differently, and she reached out to him by Twitter, and I think this was an online relationship. It's okay, Mackenzie. And anyway, she said, "I see you're in a lot of pain," and she asked him if he could get some help and would see a counselor and talk about it, and a doctor, and he talked about how he didn't have a lot of money, and she made sure he knew money would not be the issue. And so she reached out then by Twitter to the San Antonio community, which is where he lives. And before long, the mayor of San Antonio was getting involved, and there was a doctor who could deal with slip discs and another who was a counselor, and things began to change, and they became friends online like this in this remarkable way, because this man who had called Sarah an offensive misogynist name was finding himself, because of that same woman, becoming more human again. And we are all instructed. Sarah saw this man. She saw through his foul statement to his pain. And this is what Jesus teaches us to do. This is Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday weekend. It's also the 50th anniversary of his death. We've had several opportunities to renew our commitment to what he stood for this weekend. On Friday night, the Reverend William Barber filled the room at Temple Emmanuel, and when I say he filled the room, in more ways than one. I mean, it was packed, big crowd, big man, big message. Yesterday, some of us went to Friendship West Baptist Church in South Dallas and heard my good colleague and powerful preacher, Dr. Frederick Haynes. He reminded us that even where it comes to Dr. King, we have to look deeper. We have a tendency just to look at a shallow level at King, just to focus on the dream, On a phrase in his great dream speech, like, I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream. And that's beautiful. But when King himself was asked what he wanted to be remembered for, it was not to be a dreamer. Even at his funeral, he wanted somebody to just say that he was a drum major for justice. That is to say, if we want to honor Dr. King's legacy, it isn't about retelling the story of his dream for unity. It's about addressing the conditions that make unity still a dream. When we see those things and do something about them, then we are really seeing things. We are going to the cause and not staying on the surface where it's safe. We're getting involved. You see, one of the reasons we fail to see is because we know that if we do see, then we will have to do something about what we see. If I don't see that panhandler, or if I pretend not to see him, then I don't have to stop and speak and bother and give, maybe, Now, this is getting a little too close to home, but I don't know if your house is like this, but Kim has a way of asking me all the time, some version of, George, didn't you see that? It's usually like an overflowing garbage can, dirty dishes in the sink or some such thing, And my studied reply is, no, honey, I didn't see, Which is a practiced and disciplined habit of not seeing, don't you know? Because if I did see, I would be expected to do something about it. But if we would just come to see as Jesus beckons us to, there would be greater things, he says, we would see. He tells Nathaniel, he says, what, you're so astonished because I saw you under the fig tree? You come follow me and learn how to see like I see, and you will see heaven open and angels ascending and descending on the Son of Man. And now we're back to Jacob again. That story, in the Old Testament where he is sleeping on the ground, stone for a pillow, and he sees heaven open and a ladder and angels going up and down on this ladder because heaven and earth are in that very place connected. They are one. And he sees it and recognizes it's a holy place. And it's as if Jesus is saying, you will see like that. You will be able to see that there is a connection between heaven and earth that is right over me wherever I am, which is also maybe another way of saying that he's going to teach us to see that since he is everywhere, this is the condition all the time, everywhere and with everyone, heaven and earth connected, God being involved in our lives wherever we are. But you will only see these things if you learn to see, and to learn to see, you have to come and see. That is, you have to develop your spiritual eyesight by putting yourself in proximity to Jesus, who is the light of the world and by whom we can all see things more clearly. The late David Matthews was last pastor of the Royal Lane Baptist Church here in Dallas, and he once told the story of a man who needed to make a phone call. Now, this is going to take some of you back because it was before cell phones. He was in a New York City subway station, and he was standing outside of a phone booth. Phone booth, anyone? Right? And he was straddling one foot in and one foot out, and he was paging through a phone book. Phone book, anyone? Right? And he was trying to see a number, and there's this, dim yellow bulb up in the old subway stations that he's trying to get the light over his shoulder so he can find the number. And this woman, comes up and says to him, "What are you doing?" And he says, "Well, I'm trying to make a call. I need to find this number, and I can't see." And she looks at him the way some women have, never mind, and says, "Why don't you just get in the phone booth and close the door behind you, and the light comes on, and you'll be able to see perfectly clearly." Our commitment to come and see, to commit to being with Jesus, is what begins to teach us how to see and make it possible to see the world differently. And when we see through his eyes, we might start seeing how God is present and at work all over the world, including in this very room. Amen.